What is up, guys? Alex from Lakey Wargames here, and welcome to today's Ossiarch Bonereapers Tactics video. Today we're going to be going over all the command trait enhancements from our battletome. We're going to be discussing what they do for us and how best to utilize them. So, let's get on into it. Okay, so as we said in that little intro there, we are going to be looking at all the command traits for the Ossiarch Bonereapers from their battle tome today. Now there are 6 different command traits that we are going to be covering, and if you wish to follow along you can find this on page 76 of your Ossiarch Bonereapers battle tome. Just a little word of note before we get started. The first trait that we're going to be looking at on the list here is Dark Acolyte, and this was changed in the July 2023 FAQ for Ossiarch Bonereapers. I'll leave a link in the description below to the Warhammer community FAQ page, so if you wish to download the latest, it won't be the July one, it will be whatever time you're viewing this. I'll just leave a link to the generic page. So you can bring that open and go through the Ossiarch Bonereapers tome, where you will find the current change to Dark Acolyte, and if at any future point anything else has changed, you'll be able to find that as well. Also, just quickly before we get started, if you wish to discuss more things Ossiarch Bonereapers with more like-minded individuals with all awesome ideas, I do also run a Ossiarch Bonereapers themed Discord. A link will be in the description below, where you can talk all things OBR all the time with more awesome people. So that will all be in the description below, so if you wish to follow along with any of those links, they'll be down there waiting for you. But today, let's crack on with the video and let's get on into those command traits. We have 6 of them to get through, and there are some really awesome ones in this list. The first one here is Dark Acolyte, and this is wizard only in your hero phase. If the first spell this general attempts to cast from the lore of Ossian sorcery in that phase is successfully cast, that spell cannot be unbound. Now, this is one of the really awesome command traits. I haven't yet made the video, but I will be getting to it when we get to there in the book. We will be going through the spell lore in depth and breaking down each individual spell. Now, the lore of Ossian sorcery is the spell lore unique to the Ossiarch Bonereapers and is the one in the battletome, and in my opinion is probably one of the best spell lores for a army in the game. It's full of lots of amazing buffs and debuffs to your enemies that really benefit you, and has lots of versatility. If you end up with a caster such as a Soul Mason who knows the entire lore because he is a lore master, then you get some really flexible access for that caster to be able to do so many different things to benefit your army in so many different ways. And having something like Dark Acolyte there, that means the first spell you cast just can't be unbound. They all also have a relatively low casting value, usually around the 5 or 6 mark. There's some that's a little bit higher, but for the majority of them and the ones that you really want, you're looking at around casting value 5 or 6. So to be able to get that off on a really decent average roll, the average roll on 2 dice being a 7, and just not being able to be unbound because you successfully cast it, means you can get those really important buffs and debuff spells off as and when you need them, and there's nothing that the enemy can do to stop you. Now, the drawback to this trait is that it's only for the first spell you attempt to cast. So again, if you are using that Soul Mason as your general with Dark Acolyte, who is a 2-cast wizard, it's only the first spell that he casts that's going to be unbindable, and any other further attempts to other spells that you make, the enemy will be able to unbind them as per normal. The other thing to note there is also, and this is usually something I try not to cover too much, I try not to make these tactical guides very General's Handbook specific at the time, because I like to try and make it so that the tactical guides will prolong the sort of stand of time, if you will, and be flexible in and out of different rule sets. But to the General's Handbook currently, the Ant Door season, Dark Acolyte is a really amazing trait to help you score one of the battle tactics, which is Magical Dominance, and that is to cast a spell with one of your wizards, not have it unbound, and then none of your other spells be unbound either. And that means if you take Dark Acolyte, you take a really easy to cast spell, say like Empower Netherite Weapons, which is on a 5. You cast that out, the enemy can't unbind it, and then you just don't cast any more spells, and boom, you've scored an easy battle tactic. So Dark Acolyte is big thumbs up from me. I think it's really powerful. Like I said, getting some of those spells off, and on something like a Soul Mason who has insane flexibility in the spell lore, it's just great to be able to get that first spell off easy peasy. So next up on our list is Show of Superiority. While this general is on the battlefield, roll a dice before your opponent spends any command points to use a command ability. On a 5+, your opponent must spend 2 command points to issue that command instead of 1. Now this one is really cool. The nice thing about this is it's just while your general is on the battlefield. So that means as long as you are deployed, so you're not somehow pushed into a reserve or taken off the table in any way, it's completely unlimited range on this. It's completely battlefield wide anytime that your opponent tries to use a command, and it is for every command that the opponent tries to use. So if there's something like Slaanesh and they're trying to, or another OBR army, and they're trying to spam out lots of commands, then you get to roll for this a lot of times. Now on the flip side to that, if you're fighting someone who isn't like Slaanesh or OBR and isn't spamming command points out left and right, you are only getting this off on a 5+, so it isn't a very high chance of doing it if they're only using 1 or 2 commands a turn, and it therefore isn't very reliable. And to be honest, with some of the other things in this list, I think it's just one of those you are better off taking something else at the end of the day. But it can be very nice when it pops up, being able to stop your opponent being able to use certain commands when they only have the 1 point left when that 5+ pops out. And like I said, it can be really effective into someone who is trying to use multiple commands across multiple phases, and you can really mess up their game plan. If you have Catacross in your list, this does go quite nicely with the Aviarch Spymaster, which is once per turn you roll a dice when your opponent receives a command point, and on a 5+, that command point is lost. So if you've got Catacross in your army, you can try and deduct a command point from the enemy at the start when they are generating command points, and then later on in that turn when they're trying to use the command points they do have left over, if they have any, then you can really mess them up with Show of Superiority. But again, they are both on 5+, so it's probably not worth building your sort of game plan around that, but it is neat to know and can really mess up the enemy when it pulls off. The third one on our list is Mighty Artisan. And this is a really nice and simple one. It's just ignore negative modifiers to save rolls for attacks that target this general. Now this is really cool. A lot of people will straight away read that and just think, oh, it's ethereal, never mind. But the nice thing about this one is it is just ignore negative modifiers to save rolls. So that means you can still positively affect your save. So for example, if you were to put this onto a Liege Cavalos who has a base save of 3+, he is now a 3+ save guy who is immune to rend in essence. And then if you put him in like a Catacross list and you use your Supreme Lord of the Bonereaper Legions to give him +1 to save, he is now a 2+ save ignoring save modifiers. So that can be really, really cool and make him super tanky. And I think a lot of people will underestimate this command trait for that reason. I think really it gets overshadowed by another couple that we are going to talk about, but it's really nice to have that in the back of your mind. There's artifacts, again, like the spell lore, I will deep dive all the artifacts, but if you combine the Mighty Artisan and the Load of Saturation artifact onto something like a Liege Cavalos, then you will really, really see an effective boost in tankiness for your general, and you'll basically be unkillable at that point. Now, one thing to note with that, the Mighty Artisan, is yes, it does make you ignore negative modifiers to your save rolls, but you are still susceptible to mortal wounds. So even though you might be a 2+ unrendable armor save, if you get hit by something that causes mortals, you still only go down to a 6+ ward save, and with the amount of mortals that are floating around in this game, and some of them that are very range projection heavy, you do have to be a little bit careful about where you go and not to make sure to run into a load of mortals. But against normal attacks you will just be laughing as you shrug them off and then heal back any wounds you might sustain with some of the awesome healing we have in this book. So on to number 4, and that is Crafted from Beastbone. This is after this general has fought for the first time at the start of each battle round. Add 1 to the attack characteristic of this general's weapons for the rest of the battle. This effect is cumulative. Wow, I really butchered the pronunciation on that one. But yeah, it basically means that this effect will stack once you get it ticking. So to trigger this, you have to fight for the first time, so the earlier you get into combat, the more effective this is going to be. The problem is a lot of our heroes outside of the Mortisan Soul Reaper, who is just sort of overshadowed by every other Mortisan hero in this book. And again, the Liege Cavalos can be a nice take for this, but I do think this is again overshadowed by the last two that we are going to be getting onto. But yeah, adding +1 to the attacks it sounds really nice, and I suppose situationally it can be good. But again, our heroes aren't really great at fighting. We have a lot of amazing utility support heroes, but out and out right fighters at the moment, we don't really have any for our non-unique characters. It's sort of a really nice, fun one that sounds cool on paper, but I think in the actual heat of the battle, you're probably going to get the last sort of 3 turns from sort of turn 3 onwards once you get stuck in to stick that up. So just think of it as adding like 2 or 3 attacks to your general, and like I said, they're not really that fighty anyway. So yeah, I probably wouldn't think too much about this one, but could be cool to see in a fun game or sort of a narrative campaign. Number 5 on our list is Aura of Sterility. Now this one is really cool. What you do with this one is subtract 1 from hit rolls and wound rolls for attacks made with missile weapons that target friendly Ossiarch Bonereapers units wholly within 12 inches of the general. Now that is absolutely amazing. Being able to do -1 to hit and wound rolls in a big 12-inch bubble is always awesome. Now again, that is only for ranged attacks, but to be honest, this army and what you want to be doing is getting up and close and fighting with the enemy toe-to-toe. With the amount of recursion that we have in this book, with the amount of save stacking that we can put out, and with just the amount of sheer wounds that we can have in some of our models, fighting someone in combat is exactly where we want to be, so limiting the amount of damage or losses that you sustain in the approach to the enemy is really favourable for us. So Aura of Sterility is really great for that. Now one downside to this is a lot of things will try and proc mortals on 6s to hit, and this does absolutely nothing to do with that. So if you're fighting against Lumineth and they have a load of sentinels, and they're just absolutely dropping the mortals from the sky with their sunmetal arrows, unfortunately this won't really affect the damage potential that they're going to be fishing for, but it does take the sting out of the rest of the wounds that are going to be coming through, and again from that 12-inch bubble it's something that you can really project to a nice decent portion of your force. For example, if you have a Mortisan Bone Shaper and he is hiding in amongst sort of 20 or 30 Mortek Guard, you can easily blanket all 30 of the Mortek Guard and a Harvester and maybe another support hero like a Soul Mason in that 12 inches at all times to stop them being shot at. On things like the Harvester, it is more important because that is such a big pincushion target that someone will try and take out. The amount of times I've tried Aura of Sterility out, someone like Sentinels has shot into the Harvester and gets it down to the last few wounds, and just making that -1 to hit, -1 to wound makes the difference in those non-mortal damage that would usually tick through afterwards that probably would have killed it, but left it on a couple of wounds. And then in my turn, between something like a Bone Shaper or Arcan and Catacross, being able to return 3 wounds wholly chunk at a time to the Harvester itself has been really instrumental in keeping him alive. So Aura of Sterility is really good if you're dealing with a lot of range damage. Something like KO can be a really good one to have this. Again, it's one of those a little situational, because if you end up running into something like Khorne or another OBR army that's not going to be bothering about shooting you at all, then this wastes your whole command trait slot. So if you're thinking of taking this one, you really have to think about the local meta or the tournament that you might be attending and what armies are hot right now. But as soon as shooting gets really hot, then it's great to be able to have this as a command trait to slot into your lists. Now, moving on to the last of the command traits, and this is one of my personal favourites, and that is Diversionary Tactics. This command trait will subtract 3 from charge rolls for enemy units that attempt a charge within 12 inches of this general, and that is absolutely huge. The reason that that is such of a big impact is because obviously the enemy can't move within 3 inches of you but without being able to declare a charge. So even just think of the minimum that they are standing 3 inches away from you. All they need is anything but a double 1 to be able to make that charge. Now, if they're in range of Diversionary Tactics, they don't have to be wholly within 12 inches of this general. So if one model from, say, a 20-man unit of Chaos Warriors is within that 12 inches, then the whole unit, when it attempts its charge, is going to be -3. Now, even if they're that 3 inches away, they are now suddenly 6 inches away, which, although on average with 2 dice is a favourable charge for them, that is a massive swing in the roll required, and the chances of them getting that charge off from going from that 3 to a 6, it absolutely just doubles it outright. And then once you start thinking about the enemy, when they're within 12 inches, say maybe they're 6 or 7 inches away, which again on average is a decent odds of charging, they now suddenly go to that 9 or 10 inches and it's an out of favour charge for the enemy to make. So it really limits your opponent in being able to make those charges and get their units in to where they want. If you're playing within something like Mortis Praetorians, where when the enemy finishes a charge move you can make a counter charge, it can really mess up your opponent's plans. If they try and charge in multiple units, only one of them makes it, so they now no longer have their support pieces in combat, and then you can use your Mortis Praetorian charge to then go off somewhere else and do something with another unit, and just really cause havoc in and among the enemy ranks. One of the other things you can do with Diversionary Tactics involves your Bone Tithe Nexus, and that is when you use the Punishment of Lethargy. So if the enemy gets within 18 inches, you get to roll a dice from your Bone Tithe Nexus, and on a 4+, they then become another -3 to charge rolls until your next hero phase. So if you get the Bone Tithe Nexus in range and you do roll that 4+, again, this is only on one, the Bone Tithe Nexus only affects one unit within 18 inches of him, and again on 4+ it's 50-50, whereas Diversionary Tactics is just all the time anyone within 12 inches. But if you stack the Bone Tithe Nexus, it does stack with Diversionary Tactics, so you can make one enemy unit, if you get that 4+, -6 to charge, and that is just absolutely terrifying and horrific to think about. Adding 6 inches to someone's charge. So even if they're that 3 inches that we spoke about before, where they suddenly need a double 1, then they get -6 to their charge. Now they need a 9. And that is just absolutely crazy, and you can do so many fun things with that. And like I said, it just gives you the ability to be able to pick your fights and just mess with the opponent if they're trying to multi-charge you. And that wraps it up for all of our command traits today. That is all 6 that we've covered. What I would like to do is just wrap this up with picking my top 3 command traits that I think are best worth taking and why I put them in that order. For me, the first one is Dark Acolyte at the moment. Again, that is sort of tied to the General's Handbook, just because you can score the easy battle tactic with it. But at the same time, it's one of those that requires nothing. There's so many wizard heroes that you're going to want to be taking in your army, or your Mortisans are really effective to have this on, whether it's the Bone Shaper, the Ossifactor, the Soul Mason, or the Soul Reaper. They can all take something out of the spell lore, which is relatively low casting and easy to get, and it's just great to be able to get that buff, whether it's Empower Netherite weapons, whether you want something a bit more aggressive like Drain Vitality. Being able to have that unbindable is just absolutely fantastic. Second one on my list is the Diversionary Tactics. Again, just messing with your opponent, really being able to pick your fights, keep things at arm's length. Once you combine it with that Bone Tithe Nexus, you can really start to shut things down. So it's just great for that reason. And the third one on my list would be the Aura of Sterility. The reason that one is third is just because it is situational. If you fight something with no shooting, then yeah, it does absolutely nothing for you. But at the same time, if you run into something like the KO, like Slanesh, Blissbarb Archer Spam, then this thing can be an absolute lifesaver. So depending on where the meta is at the moment and in your local area, you may rate this one higher, but it's just amazing to have this in our book and in our back pocket, so if that meta shifts, then we have access to something as awesome as that. But what do you guys think about the command traits? Which would be your top 3? Which one is your favourite? And yeah, let me know what you think about these in the comments below and how you like to use them in your armies. As always guys, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe. Happy wargaming. Psst. Hey you! Did you know that Lakey Wargames now has an official eBay store? You can buy yourself all kinds of pre-painted and new on sprue hobby goodness and support the channel at the same time. There's a link in the description below if you want to check it out. I'd greatly appreciate it, and it's a fantastic way to support the channel. Okay, see you in the next one.